US President Donald Trump's tariff war is seeing no signs of slowing down, with another player now entering the fight. China has imposed retaliatory tariffs on the United States, imposing an aggressive hike of 34% on US exports, leading to President Trump issuing a deadline of 8th April for the country, warning that failure to comply by that time would trigger a 50% tariff on Chinese goods starting the 9th of April. China, meanwhile, has stated it will fight back until the end and not back down under the US president's blackmail. Now, with global markets witnessing significant upheaval following Trump's reciprocal tariffs, the impact of the fresh war between two of the world's biggest economies on the rest of the world and India remains to be seen. In fact, we're getting breaking developments coming in on this story. The head of the European Commission has called on China to help negotiate a solution to the trade war gripping the global economy. Ursula von der Leyen has spoken with China's Premier Li Qiang on the phone to discuss the state of EU-China relations. According to von der Leyen, she underscored the importance of stability and predictability for the global economy. Von der Leyen has further stated that Europe and China both have a responsibility to support a strong, reformed trading system that is free, fair and founded on a level playing field. She's also emphasized China's role in addressing trade diversion caused by the tariffs. Mitali Rukore is joining us on the broadcast, economist. For more on this, Mitali, big statement by Ursula von der Leyen, the EU head, speaking with the Chinese premier. What do you make of this conversation?
First of all, Uday, I think you might recall a time when we used to have model UN in college and we used to simulate some crises. And I think this is one of those crises that we would simulate and say, you know, the Europeans are calling the Chinese. It's really a scenario that we used to think about in college and never thought it would appear in real life. And I think today, China is being seen as a sane global power because the Chinese have gone ahead and they have actually made statements which have, made the world feel that this is a massive second largest, economy in the world, which is saying we are open to trade. Of course, the Chinese in the past have done many actions and continue to do many actions which place their traders and their economy at a strategic advantage vis-a-vis other economies, through their state-owned companies and through their subsidies. But at the same time, at this point in time, the European Union finds itself between the devil and the deep sea because it has to navigate and it has to get at least one of the two parties, either the US or the Chinese, on their side. So, really a development which I never thought I would see in my lifetime.
Yes, let me also, in fact, quickly draw in Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, in at this point as well. Madhav Nalapat, the EU, president speaking with the Chinese premier. They're looking at a way to diffuse this situation, even as, of course, the US threatens further tariffs on China because of their policy of reciprocity, in which the Chinese have further increased tariffs on the US.
Look, the fact of the matter is that Donald Trump may speak to his Chinese counterpart. Frankly, that only emboldens the Chinese to react even more forcefully. But the reality of the situation is, and I've gone by the cabinet choices of Trump on security, this is a very China-focused administration. From the US Trade Representative, right to Commerce Secretary, Defense Secretary, National Security Advisor, CIA, FBI, the Director of National Intelligence, all of them are China-focused. And these tariffs are very China-focused. China basically raised tariffs, thinking that Trump will back down and they can negotiate. Instead of which, Trump has actually doubled down on it. And now the tariffs are extremely high. So very frankly, what the intention is to drive China out of global markets. Now, the Chinese are spending vast amounts of money as subsidy. They are spending, public spending has gone up substantially. It will go up even more. That the reality of the situation is that the Americans believe that China is a mortal threat to them, and that if China emerges as the top economy in the world, that's the end of the dollar, that's the end of their security. It's a very bad augury for the world. As far as the Europeans are concerned, frankly, the Trump tariffs are not really directed at Europe. They're directed at China. Now, the Chinese are being forced to build a railway line all the way from production centers in China, bypassing Russia and cutting through some other countries where, frankly, they may face problems, into Europe to try and increase exports to Europe. They're desperate because they know US exports to US are going to fall. And as far as Europe is concerned, they'll have to take a decision, as correctly said by Mitali, between the US and China. Yeah, you can't play with both as you did so often in the past. And I think the Singaporeans have realized that they were playing with both China and the US. They were the bridge, and later on they became good trading partners of both. But the Singapore Prime Minister has made it very clear that era is over. Now we have an era of confrontation, which we have not seen before, is what the Singapore Prime Minister said for people of Singapore in a broadcast. So I'd like to say this is a very targeted move against China. And India has been very wise to react in a very moderate manner. I mean, frankly, so has Japan, so has South Korea, and the Europeans also. Personally, I would advise them to react in a moderate manner. And the Chinese are hoping they would react spectacularly and carry forward this and make it a real trade war. As of now, it's a US China trade war. And it can be made a trade war only if the governments in Europe they do not know that, and they basically act as though it's a global trade war. It's not yet a global trade war. It will be horrible if it will become a global trade war. It's basically a war concerning the future. What Mitali was saying, superpower, big power, semiconductors, all that is true. And that's exactly why these people are motivated to levy these tariffs. I think the Chinese are in a bind, and I don't believe the Europeans are going to get away for very long. If they keep buying Chinese stuff, I can assure you they're going to be hit by tariffs. So they'll have to come to a decision. I mean, India under Prime Minister Modi has taken a decision to be friendly with the United States. It's a very wise decision, despite our traditional friendship with Russia. And I would like to say the Europeans also would be well advised to rely on the United States, to rely on a democracy, whatever its imperfections, rather than an authoritarian state, whatever short-term advantages you get. And as has correctly been said, the reality is China offers short-term nirvana and long-term problem. So I would say that the tipping point is being reached. If it is not, I mean, it is, or maybe it's shortly going to be reached. And I believe most European countries are going to choose the United States over China. Thank you.
Okay, let me in fact quickly ask Akash Jindal, economist as well, there on where things are headed. Akash Jindal, do you believe, despite of course this conversation with the EU head, where she has urged rationality and she has urged, sort of a pragmatic approach, this trade war with the China and US is unlikely to, to slow down, to cool down? Do you see further escalation in the next few days, Akash Jindal?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody, especially Dr. Madhavan Alapat. Now, I expect the trade war to escalate because I'll take you back to the earlier term of Donald Trump. Then also, there was a specific US-China trade war which slowed down the global economy. The only thing is why we forgot it, because immediately after that, Corona started. But US-China trade war happened and it did slow down the global economy that time also. Right now also it's primarily US-China trade war, and China, the way they are, they seem unlikely to show flexibility and unlikely to bend towards things. And the way Donald Trump is going all out, I don't think there's going to be a solution as far as US or China is concerned. Of course, initially Donald Trump, he had tariffs against China, Mexico, Canada, now reciprocal tariffs, now again threatening tariffs against China. But I don't think the war to cool down, global trade war of US-China to cool down, and I think it would have a decent negative effect over the global economy. EU may try, but is China going to listen to EU? Is China going to be flexible? And don't we know China, how they have been dealing with US companies, how they have been dealing with their own big businessmen, how China has been stopping many reforms which they don't want, which are globally accepted reforms, but China has never had them. So I don't think China is going to either bend or going to be flexible, though logically it may suit them since their entire economy is based on export. Also, since China is experiencing deflation, China has been having bank debt issues, real estate issues, lots of many issues. I mean, corporations falling, but I don't think China is going to either bend or going to show flexibility. So as of now, I think things are going to escalate because see, if everybody starts being flexible and everybody starts conversing with US, then perhaps we can come to the conclusion that whatever Donald Trump was planning, he is able to do that. Because if he imposes tariffs on everybody, then everybody comes to him, asks him to negotiate, and a part of it is negotiated, then ultimately Donald Trump would be a winner. I don't think China would let him or the circumstances would let him prove a winner as simple as that. No, I don't think that's going to happen. So as of now, yes, other countries may be flexible. India, of course, I totally endorse Dr. Madhav Nalapat that we have been very flexible and we have been a solution-oriented country. Under the leadership of our Prime Minister, we know how to tackle situation. During Russia-Ukraine war also, we were the ones who tackled situation so very well. We were dealing with Russia also. We were having friendly relations with US, NATO. We purchased crude oil from Russia at discounted price. That also in rupees. Not only that, one thing more is that we purchased crude from Russia, refined it, and the refined products were exported to Europe. So Russia, rather than sending things to Europe directly, it was routed through India, and value addition was there. We did make money. So I think India, under the Prime Ministership of Modi Saab, we know how to tackle situation. We know how to skillfully tackle situation. We are not in the policies of confronting things, and now also the Indo-US dialogue, the business treaty, I think it's going to come up with some solutions, and the tariffs may be reduced because again we all know that US wants India also as an ally to counter China, and again when reciprocal tariffs were imposed, yes, of course 26% was imposed, but still Donald Trump said and referred that Narendra Modi is a great friend, and India, if he has uttered the words, that was because of some reason or logic, because he had also perceived certain things which are going to happen. So I think India would be flexible, and Indian flexibility would definitely pave way for many things. Plus, what's going to be very, very important is now, since China, bad days are there for China because already they're suffering from deflation, global investment, global money, definitely, the portfolio money definitely would be headed more towards India. And it's apparent in the markets today also. Yesterday also, the markets, when they tanked down by 3,900 points Sensex, ultimately they closed at only 2,200 points. Today
Yes.
also, they have closed around good 1,100 points as far as Sensex is concerned. So global money, which was diverted away to China, that's a very important thing, foreign portfolio money, would now surely come to India.
Okay, let me get in
Because
Ambassador
global
Mahesh
money-
Sachdev, former diplomat, also in at this point. Ambassador Sachdev, as far as you're concerned, this escalation between the US and China, which way is it headed? And also, how do you react to the decision that the Chinese have taken not to back down, not to negotiate, and also to retaliate with further aggression, to the US tariffs, and also the response, the statements that have come in saying that we are prepared to fight till the end? What can be read into this?
Thank you. I have few short bullet points, and I think much has been said, which doesn't require repetition. I would like to talk about first the point that you have raised. European Commission President has spoken to Chinese Prime Minister. And I think the worry there is that hundreds of billions of dollars of EU investments are in China, where cheaper versions of European cars, for example, are produced and are exported to the United States and elsewhere. So if the tariff goes up by another 50%, then all those hundreds of billions of dollars of European money would get stuck and would be unproductive till the situation gets resolved itself. That is one part. Second part I would like to talk about is Chinese response. Chinese braggadocio is a bit contrived as far as I'm concerned. I think behind their backs, they would be looking for places through which they can divert the trade. India is a good point. There already people are talking about Chinese investing huge amount of money in India to divert production of buy cars, etc., to America from India, and so on and so forth. There are many such opportunities. Much of Africa, much of Latin America is 10% uh, tax regime oriented. So that presents itself as a place from where Chinese can divert their exports and transit them, add value in these countries, and they become local items. Thirdly, I would like to also say the Chinese sort of riposte is partly based on supply lines dominance that they already have acquired stealthily over the past decade. And that would not be easy to snatch away. Chinese know that, and they think they can use it to their advantage in an eyeball to eyeball confrontation with the United States. Lastly, I would like to also say that India there have been trends in India to take solace on our relatively low level of duty as compared to many others like Vietnam, like Bangladesh, etc. I think it will be unwarranted and it will be ill-advised to uh, gloat over 27%, which is not small, which is one of the highest rates of duty any industrialized country has been subject to. Europe is 20%, Japan is 10%, I think, and so on and so forth. So India has not been spared. And if we compare ourselves to others, there's no point in doing so because others can sign a free trade agreement at the bat of an eyelid, and Bangladesh or Vietnam could simply go down to zero. And we would be left with 27% to take care of. So I think we need to get our act together. And when I mean getting our act together, I think we have one of the largest markets within India. That market has to be better leveraged through products that are competitively priced, through products that are quality-wise at the world level. Tomorrow, when you sign FTA with the United States, others are going to ask for similar agreements, and a new benchmark would be set. But European Union is already talking in terms of if you're giving 0 duty entry to US cars, our cars should come in at zero duty as well. So what happens if our tariff walls vanish and nobody's going to then buy Mahindra and Tata? They will all be sort of talking about Volkswagens and Bentleys and whatever. So I think we need to take this seriously.
Yes.
And get our act together.
Okay, let me ask you then, Mitali Nakore, about the India viewpoint on all of this. How should India view this escalation between US and China? What will be the direct fallout on us? Also, the EU, negotiations and mediation, what's the viewpoint of India on all of this?
So I think at this point in time, when we look at India's reaction, firstly, to the Trump tariffs, it's been a very cautionary kind of reaction. And this is absolutely the right reaction. The wait and watch approach is the way to go because at this point in time, we have a lot of interests to balance. We have an IT sector which is highly exposed to US exports. Nearly 75% of our exports in the IT sector go to the US markets and to US clients. So therefore, it's very important for us not to take any steps which may cause any more chaos or any more confusion. And also, I think the Prime Minister has laid out a very clear path through his last visit to the US, which actually happened before these tariffs were announced. The fact that he's given us a North Star saying that by 2030, India US trade should increase to nearly $500 billion. I mean, this gives us a path to follow, and this opens the channels of communication. The Ministry of Commerce is doing a number of back channel conversations, and other agencies, in fact, even within the government, have now been instructed not to have one-to-one conversations with their counterpart agencies. So, it makes a lot more sense for a single SPOC, a single agency to do these negotiations at the back end. And of course, when it comes to EU, I think India maintains its own bilateral relationship with the EU. We had a massive delegation from the EU come down to New Delhi in March itself, and there were a number of products and value chains that were looked at, and a number of areas it was looked at that regulations could be simplified, could be eased. And I was just at a conference right now by the Central Board of Indirect Taxes, and they are looking at mutual recognition agreements as our main way of furthering trade in the EU. So a number of countries within the EU, India is now negotiating mutual recognition agreements for testing and quality standards, which is a very practical thing when it comes to exports, and will ease exports not just for the large sectors and large enterprises, but also for MSMEs. So I think India's approach very cautionary, very wait and watch, but the right approach at this time.
Yes, Professor Madhav Nalapad, where do you see things going now? With this escalation, Donald Trump has, of course, indicated U-turn is unlikely, to go back on tariffs. Where do you then see things headed?
Look, I just got word that the Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan has been handed over to the US for its activity. You're seeing the same thing happen in the Panama Canal. You're seeing the same thing happen in Suez. In all these choke points now, the US is basically moving very swiftly to claim these choke points, even at Chinese expense. And Bagram is the latest example. The Taliban government, by the way, that's agreed to a deal with the US in which Bagram is handed over to the United States Air Force and the United States Army. And so that is the point. And this is India's opportunity, quite frankly. And Prime Minister Modi is well aware of that. He's very skillful as a navigator in three spotters. And I'd like to point out that India can be the new supply chain, the new producer for many of these products. Indian companies can do that. The environment for startups has got to be greatly increased, because the reality is it's going to be more and more difficult for companies to do business in China, and Indian companies also better watch out. Those companies that are heavily invested in Chinese imports and Chinese components are going to have a problem. So I think, quite frankly, there's a huge opportunity for India presented by this US-China Cold War 2.0. And I'm sure Prime Minister Modi will take advantage of this opportunity to propel India's GDP further. And in my view, the target of $500 billion is probably likely to be reached and exceeded. Thank you.
My thanks to all of our guests for joining us on this discussion. On that note, it's time for a very short break.